Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So as a big fan of the Need for Speed franchise, I realized that what really connects me to the most of these games is the music. So I decided to do this big project and do a review and talk about every single Need for Speed soundtrack to date. Currently, we have 23 mainline Need for Speed titles, so that's quite a lot. But the main reason why I decided to start this off with Need for Speed 3 was because, for me at least, it is the most memorable title that I remember from back in the day. I actually first got introduced to Need for Speed with Need for Speed 2 Special Edition for the PlayStation 1, and I will cover that soundtrack as well as the one from the very first game. But for now, let's go with this. Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit came out first for the PlayStation 1 in March 1998, and later that year in October for the PC. It will be the first in the series to offer cop chases where instead of just running away from them, you could as well be in the role of the police officer and chase down illegal street racers and try to bust them before they finish their laps. Personally, I think this was the title that put Need for Speed on the map for many gamers. The first two games did well enough, but Hot Pursuit took the series to another level. If you're an old school gamer as I am, you could say this was the title that gave birth to the first generation of Need for Speed fans, the second one being from the Underground series and up. Now, when you play a Need for Speed title today, automatically you assume that the soundtrack will consist of a lot of popular artists or songs at the time and maybe throw in a few guaranteed hits from the past. This was not the case back in the day. For the most part, Need for Speed soundtracks were made by producers and composers who were specifically making music for that game. There were no top chart hits licensed songs like we have included with every new title today. So let's talk about the Need for Speed 3 soundtrack and the people responsible for it. There were a total of 23 tracks composed for this game. One track though, Sirius 909, was exclusive to the PlayStation 1. Now mind you, not all 23 tracks were used during actual gameplay, but some were only played in the main menu or selection screen, or for example, if you didn't press any buttons during a menu screen, a demo of the gameplay would pop up, and then that would be where some of these songs were played only. Also at the time, unlike today where we have a vast soundtrack of many artists and the songs play randomly, back then, a single song was used specifically for one track, meaning you would never hear any other song during a race besides the one designated for that track you were currently racing on. 6 composers / music producers were involved in making the music for Hot Pursuit, and fun enough, most of them were Canadian. I'd just like to apologize in advance if I butchered anyone's name here. I try my best, but you know how it is with names. Like you think you know how they sound, but in the end it's something completely different. First we got Traz Damji. Traz is a Tanzanian-born music composer and sound designer, and for this title specifically, his song was most notably used as the main theme for the game in the intro video. Besides just working on Need for Speed, he also did music and sound effects for Dead Rising 3 and 4, NBA Live 95 all the way to 2002, NBA Street, NHL 99, NFL 94, Top Gun Danger Zone, The Simpsons, and many others. Next is Rom Di Prisco. Rom has been involved with the Need for Speed series for a very long time. You can hear his music in Need for Speed 2, Need for Speed 3, High Stakes, Hot Pursuit 2, Undercover, The Run, and even the 2015 Need for Speed title. Other notable games that he worked on are Fortnite, Mass Effect 2, Unreal Tournament 3, Guacamelee, and others. Besides being a producer, composer, and remixer for the video game industry, he's also very much involved in making music for TV and film. For example, The Sopranos, NCIS, and the Saw 2 movie. He's actually credited for 10 tracks in the Need for Speed Hot Pursuit soundtrack. Alistair Hirst. Alistair is an audio director and producer, and he worked on the first 4 Need for Speed games as well as Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 from 2002. Besides that, he's also credited for work on games such as Guild Wars, Rise of Nations, Tom Clancy's End War, Test Drive 2, Forza Motorsport 4, and many others. Currently, he's working at Amazon as an audio director. Crispin. Crispin is credited as one of the composers for the first 5 Need for Speed games and worked on other titles such as Unreal 2, Gears of War 4, Company of Heroes, and a few Kinect games. Saki Kaskas. Saki, also known as Theodosius Kaskaminidis, was a German-born video game composer. Just like Crispin, he too contributed to the first 5 Need for Speed titles. Other notable games that he was a part of were Mass Effect 2, Sleeping Dogs, Medieval Total War, Full Auto, NBA Live, and the NHL series. Unfortunately, Saki passed away at the age of 44 in November 2016. The cause of his death was never publicly revealed. And last but not least, we got Matt Ragan. Matt has contributed to both Hot Pursuit games as well as Motor City Online. He too worked on titles such as Guild Wars, Forza Motorsport 4, and Rise of Nations, amongst many others. The Hot Pursuit soundtrack mainly consists of electronic and rock tracks. As already mentioned in the beginning, each song is tied to a specific track, so you would always have one rock and one electronic song per track that would just shuffle as you play. All the tracks are strictly instrumental, meaning there's no vocal tracks at all. When talking about the rock tracks, they're not your typical songs with a verse and a chorus repeated 3 times and then the song is over. Let's take for example the song Little Sweaty Soul by Saki. The song starts slow and innocent with a funk bass and then goes into guitar shredding mode, slows down again with a banjo this time, after which it goes into another slowish solo, then back to shredding. Then another solo, but a much faster one this time, and then it just drops into a funk beat. The song is almost 9 minutes long and it constantly keeps evolving. It almost never goes back to the same tone, but instead keeps changing the progression of the track till the very end. Saki was such an amazing guitar player. Same goes for Snorkeling Cactus Weasel by Matt. It starts off with this Wild West vibe and then slowly but surely it starts building up into the savage guitar shredding rock song, which you would never tell it would go down that road, especially considering how the song started. Rear Flutterblast for the most of its duration is a very upbeat track, and then as it gets closer to the end it shifts into this much more sinister tone, ending with an electronic beat. Since each song is tied to a single track, that could also be the reason why these songs are so long and diverse. You probably would want to do a 10-minute race where you just keep listening to the same song 4 or 5 times, right? Now, you have to understand, these songs were never meant to be radio friendly, nor were the people involved in making the music some famous artists. They are massively talented producers that know their craft. They knew that they were making songs for a racing game, and I think they just let loose. When it comes to electronic tracks, the biggest fear is that it could sound a bit outdated. After all, this is a soundtrack from 1998, which is now over 20 years old, and the EDM scene has evolved and changed countless of times. New genres appeared, and obviously as the technology improves, so do these songs. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that rock or metal hasn't evolved, but a quality rock song from, let's say, the 70s can still sound amazing 40 years later. To be honest, most of this actually depends on a good production quality, but today we're getting so many remasters that these old songs pretty much have a new life to them today. And I'm not really sure you can say the same thing about electronic music. Let's take, for example, Kraftwerk's first album. I mean, the technology was so limited back then, and that's what they had to work with. And that's why the songs sound night and day compared to today's EDM scene. But luckily, that's not the case with this soundtrack. Yeah, you can kind of tell that some of the songs are from that era. For example, those were the early days of drum and bass. But the tracks still hold up very well even today. And you can't really talk about the early Need for Speed music without mentioning Rom Di Prisco. His songs are so zen-like, and by that I do not mean that they're particularly slow. It's just that when you hear his tracks, you can totally picture yourself sitting in an exotic car, elbow resting on the window, head bobbing your way to work. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like his songs are the ones I remember Need for Speed the most by. The 2 absolute bangers here are Aquila 303 and Sirius 909. Especially if you have a good sound system, turn those up and man, you're going to be in for a ride. Songs such as Whacked, Whipped, and Warped by Alistair are much more sinister sounding. I would say these actually fit more like in the industrial genre. Same goes for Saki's Knossos song, which starts off as a typical, German happy hardcore sound and then shifts between industrial and mellow electronic with added guitar shredding. And I think the most relaxing song on this soundtrack has to be Monster by Crispin Hands. Overall, I think the soundtrack is amazing and it brings back a lot of memories whenever I listen to it. It was also kind of my most played Need for Speed game for a very long time, so these songs kind of stuck with me forever. For the newer, or should I say younger generation, playing Need for Speed 3 today probably will not do much for you, but you should definitely give the soundtrack a listen. If you're a fan of the Need for Speed franchise, you will be surprised to know that some of these songs mentioned here you actually probably know of, except you never knew they existed long before that time. For example, Aquila 303 and Sirius 909, the 2 tracks from this soundtrack, were actually also used in the Need for Speed 2015 soundtrack, and they were not little remasters or remixes, they actually used the original versions. Then we have Need for Speed The Run, for example. It has 2 songs as well by Rom, Cetus 808, and again Aquila 303, which were actually remixed by the amazing Mick Gordon, which you probably know most by the Doom 2016 soundtrack. While doing research for the soundtrack, I actually made an effort to get in touch with Mick Gordon, and I was mostly curious, was he approached by EA about these 2 songs, like, hey, we have these like 2 very old songs, people love them, we would love for you to do like a modern remix? Or maybe was it him that chose the songs because he was like a long-time fan of the franchise? He did reply actually, and the reply was pretty, normal. He just said, no, EA got in touch with me, they said, we want you to do this remix, and that's it. Either way, I will leave the link to the 2 songs that were remixed by Mick Gordon in the description down below. But as you can see, there's probably a big chance you heard these songs without even knowing that they're 20 plus years old and they were used in the earlier titles. Well, anyway, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me, what were some of your favorite tracks? Do you have any fond memories of the game? Any nostalgic feelings going on? As I mentioned before in the beginning, I will be covering every single Need for Speed soundtrack to date, so if this is the content you like, please consider subscribing, and I will try to get you as much info as possible on all of these soundtracks. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.